Hi, everybody, and welcome back to Chee-Tash. My name is Chris, and we're going to continue on today with the bell curve. We're going to go over Chapter 4, Steeper Ladders, Narrower Gates. What does that all mean? Well, we're going to find out shortly here, but basically, we're going to continue down this path of talking about how we are being divided and partitioned as a society along the lines of IQ, according to the authors. And oh, thank God that sound stopped. I don't know if you guys could hear that car beeping. But again, I think it's always important to remind ourselves. This book was written in 1990 or came out in 1994. But I think that a lot of this stuff rings still true today. So kind of look at it from the mindset of what does our world look like today as compared to 1994. So let's just jump right into it. The changing market for ability, and we've talked about this in the past about how there's a premium placed on intelligence in, college, the workplace, marriage. These are some things that we're going to talk about some in this video. But intelligence has become increasingly of value. In especially in the job market, we've took a look at in the previous the previous video about the trends in CEOs, how CEOs earlier in the 1900s didn't really have college degrees, and then all of a sudden, as the century progressed, more and more CEOs getting bachelor's degrees. That even kind of tapered off a little bit, and what started to rise was CEOs with post-secondary education. Who knows? Doctorates, master's degrees, MBAs, law degrees, etc. So there's more of a premium placed on CEOs who have that educational background. The military exams with the Armed Forces Qualification Training Test, and how that test was a predictor of success in the military or in your job in the military. The high IQ jobs, we saw this. Do you guys remember there was a graph of the labor force and the top IQ in the labor force, and more and more people from the top IQ, people with the higher IQs in the labor force were going to the high IQ positions. And as we're going to see, they're getting paid more in those positions. So there's a premium placed on that. Smart people are being recruited to college more efficiently. They're probably more productive. This is based on the last video about IQ's predictors of success in the workplace and the positive. And their dollar value is increasing. Remember, we talked about this last time when we did the last episode on the bell curve, on the difference between hiring the dentist and the secretary, and the cost of not hiring the best dentist is greater than the cost of not hiring the best secretary. And again, one of the big differences in those two positions are IQ. Probably IQ, educational background, etc. So this is a graph. I apologize if it's a little dark, but this is a graph showing the engineers' salaries as an example of how intelligence became much more valuable in the 1950s. And this graph shows years on the x-axis, annual salary in $1990 on the y. It's got two lines. The one line is manufacturing employees, and the top line or bullet points are engineers. And you saw from like 1930 to 1954, both occupations had steady salaries. They're both kind of on the same trajectory. And yes, engineers still made more than the manufacturing employees, but their growth was very steady. And then you come to like 1953, 1954, all of a sudden from 53 to 60, huge jump in the wages of engineers, but not much, if any, in the manufacturing employees. And the difference between these two, the difference in purchasing power of the engineers tripled since the 1940s. So again, more of a premium on higher IQ, higher education. We're going to continue on. The role of education. There we go. Katz and Murphy. They did a survey, 1987. The authors talk about this. The males making in the highest 10% of wages saw their wages increase 40%, while those at the low end of wages were mostly static. So I think what they're getting at here is those at the highest of the wages probably are in the higher IQ positions, or positions that require a lot more education. And those are the positions that that their wages are increasing. At the low end, they're mostly kind of static. And how there was this trend in increase in real wages that was happening throughout the we just saw the graph, 1950s, 60s, 70s, 80s. They were saying in the 80s, this trend reversed from a trend in the 70s where wages of college-educated people were falling in the 70s, and then the 80s it reversed. They were saying that this possibly could deal with the increase in supply of the college population, because I think we talked about this in one of the videos about at one point it was almost like there was two generations of kids on college campuses. I think because of World War II and returning soldiers then going to college themselves, plus the people who normally would go to college who did not fight, so they're at college at the same time, so huge supply, maybe demand decreased, etc. The authors have this table that shows the premium that is paid for education and having more education, primarily among new workers. So this table shows two sections, new workers and old workers. New workers with less than 12 years of school, a high school degree, or 16 or more years of school, and the percentage change in wages between 1979 and 1987. Look at those differences there. 16 or more years of school, if you're a new worker, a positive 10.8% change in wage. If you had just a high school degree or less, not very good. A minus almost 20% for just a high school degree. So staggering, the difference between having 16 or more years of school, that's at least a bachelor's, and not having that, just a high school degree or less than 12 years of school. Now, for older workers, those with 26 to 35 years of experience, not as much premium placed on their education, more so of a premium placed on just their experience and what they bring to the table from other jobs or their work, their line of work, or what they do at work, their results at work. And I thought this was a little interesting because we went over in the last chapter how experience it doesn't really matter. Like it's better to hire the smartest busboy you can find than hiring somebody who was previously a busboy, because in the long run, the higher IQ busboy is going to catch up to the other busboy. So I thought experience didn't matter too much. At least that's what I thought the authors were saying here. maybe this is a different, that is a different argument that they're making. And yes, I think still experience would, but see, I'm not sure. See, I was a little confused on it. That's why I put this bullet point here, because I thought, hey, it's better to hire just the smartest of the smart versus if somebody has more experience. Hire the IQ. And I'm confused on this table in why, well, and maybe the authors here are trying to reflect like, yeah, this isn't what happens in the real world. They hire based on experience, but the authors are saying, hey, you should be hiring based on IQ. But again, you cannot give IQ tests for employment unless they are specific to the job. And if you guys remember, the authors said that those tests are not really, they don't really test much, and they don't really test for G. They kind of just test if you have experience in this line of work. So why have the economic returns to education risen lately? Is it due to maybe artificial intelligence and the automation of a lot of our jobs? Is it maybe due to schools not really teaching curriculum in the same fashion they used to? And I'll go a step further, not teaching curriculum that maybe is pertainable to today's society. Basically, not keeping up with the times, maybe. So the schools that you do go to that do keep up with the times and are teaching you new tech, new skills, those kids are maybe a little ahead. Are we losing jobs to other countries? Well, yeah. Is it the welfare system? And, if you're getting a good chunk of payment, stimulus checks, 2020 or 2021, or unemployment benefits, whatnot, which I believe increased as well in 2020. Do you need to go back to work because you're getting the minimum that you need? I don't think that's most people. I don't, but I mean, maybe it's some people. Maybe it's some people. So you have all these possible factors on why economic returns to education are rising. But what if you could improve the education for people earning low wages? Would it make a difference? And the authors say no. The authors say it wouldn't make a difference because that's not the main factor here. The main factor is this mysterious residual, and I want you guys to guess what this could be. The mysterious residual is, the authors state, it's this unexplained variation in real wages between 63 and 87. And the demand of this residual is what's causing the disparity in the wages. And most of the increasing wage inequality during the past 2.5 decades are due to changes in the residual characteristic, not education. So, as you might have guessed, the mysterious residual is IQ. That's the culprit, as you might have guessed. So the case for IQ is the residual. Well, the authors make some points here. Shifting occupational structure of the economy and the increase in high IQ jobs and who populates and who is being hired into those high IQ jobs, other high IQ people. So there's a demand for those jobs, and if the demand increases, so does their pay. McKinley Blackburn, David Newmark, the authors reference a study by these two looking at the NLSY study on education and intelligence, and they found that smarter men earned most of the extra wage benefit. And high IQ salary, there was a difference between in salary between those with the lower IQs, below 10%, and people with the top 10% of IQ. So, top 10% of IQ job salary was about $14,000 more in 1990 dollars compared to those below the top 10% in IQ. And that's just top 10%. You're talking about cognitive elite compared to somebody who's, who knows? I mean, top 12%, which is still pretty high, but not quite cognitive elite level, Harvard, Ivy League, lawyer level, as an example. So why has cognitive ability become much more valuable? Well, lots of different reasons, particularly tech-based. You have an increase in technology. If you have somebody who's pretty smart, they can pick up on new tech, these new skills, kind of a lot faster than maybe others. You have effects of scale spurred by growths and the size of corporations and markets. So these companies have grown so big, competition is fierce. They feel that it's worth it to pay you a good sum of money if you increase their bottom line just by a couple percentage points, which is, for these large corporations, maybe like millions of dollars. And who's going to do that? Somebody who's pretty smart, pretty good at their job. There's also, in regards to that legislation and regulation, if these companies can find smart people that can get around loopholes so they can retain more money, work around some systems, they think it's worth it. Overall, society, think about this 1994, think about it now, society is becoming more and more complex. I mean, data, big data, marketing, digital marketing, development, blockchain, all this crazy stuff in finance. Society is becoming more and more complex, so it's more valuable if you can understand how to deal with those complexities. And again, who's going to do that? Probably somebody who's pretty smart. They can pick it up again right away, faster than maybe some other people. So this is the end result. Look at this graph. The high IQ occupations, well-paid occupations. I think we kind of already knew that just based on things that we've already talked about. Look at all the way on the right side, median weekly wage. You got attorneys, physicians, engineers making the most. And then as you go towards the left, college teachers, mathematicians, social scientists, accountants. As you go even more left, I mean, now you're getting into what kinds of jobs do you think? Retail, hospitality, manufacturing. So there's a premium placed on these high IQ jobs. They're going to get paid well. So now you have these high IQ jobs filled with high IQ people. And the sorting process for IQ did not stop in college. That was chapter 1. Did not stop in college. It's going on in the workplace through job applications and just getting into a job or a career. But now, even once you're in the career, there's segregation happening even when you get there. There's partitioning happening amongst IQ even when you're in there. And the authors give a little story here on the cognitive sorting through physical separation. This is on page 101. So the higher level of cognitive ability and the greater the degree of homogeneity among people involved in that line of work. So they use the example of people at a manufacturing plant who are all probably their IQs fairly similar. And that manufacturing plant separated from the company office building, down the street? Who's got the administrators, the accountants, the leadership, possibly managers, but like the CEO, CFO, COO, all that, physically separated from the people at the manufacturing plant who are of probably similar IQ. In the company office building, probably of similar IQ, but the authors state, even in the office building, there's stratification. Lower level workers towards the bottom of the building, and then, leadership, CEO, etc., towards the top of the building. Stratification in regards to IQ, even in the office building, even in one building. Then the law firm that represents that company, even more stratification. In that law firm is it's pretty much just lawyers, right? Paralegals, yes, but just lawyers who are of the top IQ, one of those high IQ positions that Murray and Herrnstein talk about. And that's all you have, for the most part, in these law firms. So the physical separation between the high IQ and the low IQ is happening. Think about it, and maybe in 2021 here, with the rise of remote work, everybody's separated. Everybody's separated. So that's kind of interesting. You don't have to be high IQ or low IQ. It's just high IQ is separated from other high IQ as compared to, 1994. All these people are all in one room together. That can still happen through Zoom and stuff, but interesting to note the difference there. There is also a residential segregation going on amongst IQ, in that authors state it simply. The factory worker seldom lives next to the executive, right? There's less economic mixing that's happening because the people that can afford to move to better areas that are bigger houses, bigger backyards, better schools, they're going to afford to do so. And the people who can't are going to stay in that same area. So what you have is the people who can afford to move. Who are these people? People with money, high IQ position. They probably have positions where they're getting paid a lot. They're probably high IQ themselves. So now they're congregating in these similar areas, and their kids are all going to the same schools, intellectually homogenous schools, right? So their kids are becoming less and less familiar with this other side of our society. I know it sounds like I'm like saying it like a bad thing or something like that, but I'm not. It's just kind of the way it is. There's this separation happening, not only in your workplace, because think about it. In your workplace, you're seeing like IQ people. You're only, if you work in that company office building, you're only seeing people from the company office building, not people from the manufacturing facility. Then when you go home, you're seeing other like-minded people in these areas and not the areas that the manufacturing employees live. And think about what that does to your psyche and your thought process, your thinking of how the world works, right? You're not getting this other perspective. So there's the cognitive partitioning via physical separation, and then also genetic partitioning. So the authors had this syllogism on page 105 that stated, actually, let me go to it. Let me physically go to it, page 105. So the authors state, if differences in mental abilities are inherited, and if success requires those abilities, and if earnings and prestige depend on success, then social standing, which reflects earnings and prestige, inherited differences among people. So genes matter, is what the authors are saying here. genes matter. The author stated, and I think we've stated this before in a previous chapter, about how the correlation here, the heritability of IQ, is no smaller than 40% and no larger than 80%. And as environments become more uniform, heritability rises. So think about this. The previous example that we just talked about, homogeneity in these residential areas, everybody's living in a similar environment. Well, the heritability is going to increase because we're keeping the environment constant. So there's been studies on this. They mention like the best study that you could possibly do on this is direct comparisons based on identical monozygotic twins reared apart. So they share all of their genes, but you're testing to see if the environment has an effect on their IQ. Rear them apart. They're raised in different situations. Oftentimes, they still have very similar IQs to each other, even if they are reared apart. And this has been done a few times. They're specifically here, they're saying most modern studies of identical twins reared in separate homes suggest a heritability for general intelligence between 0.75 and 0.8. That's very, very, very high. And if you guys remember in the introduction, there was a little section about the Burt affair, who I think was a English scientist who did studies on twins reared apart, and he was kind of lambasted for it, and kind of in today's terms would be called canceling. But there was a study I don't think it was in Minnesota, but it was called the Minnesota study, where they kind of affirmed his results of a heritability between, I think it was 0.78. It was definitely within this range of 0.75 and 0.8. Here's something that I'm trying to wrap my head around, is that the authors say that heritability rises as one ages. So this is on page 108. Where was this? This means that the variation in IQ among, say, youths age 18 to 22 is less dependent on genes than that among people ages 40 to 44. And I'm not sure why that would be. Maybe still at that younger age, your body is and your brain is still absorbing and very malleable. But once you get at that age, 40 to 44, now you're kind of stuck in your ways, so to speak. Could be. So where else are we seeing this partitioning? Is in marriage. And higher IQ people tend to marry higher IQ people. There's no way around that. They have seen, there's been studies on this that the authors do talk about in the book. First off, two opposites attract. Well, according to a 1943 study of 1,000 couples in Chicago, they looked at 51 traits amongst the couple and found that all of them were positively correlated. The couples who liked and disliked similar things, well, they're couples. They're getting married or whatnot. Husband and wife IQ correlation has been said to be in the region of 0.4. And Jensen did a review of this literature in the 70s, where Jensen looked at 43 spouse correlations for various tests of intelligence and found that it was positive 0.45, almost as high as the correlation among siblings. Very interesting. And the authors do a little thought experiment here. If the propensity to mate by cognitive ability remains the same, they compare a Harvard and a Radcliffe couple. I guess Radcliffe is a women's only college because I think only men could go to Harvard for the longest time. The propensity to mate by cognitive ability remained the same. 1930 couple, The average IQ of them would be 117. Their child probably would have an IQ of 114. Well, in 1964, as we found out from Chapter 1, Harvard became more and more elite, and more of the smartest of the smart people were going to Harvard. So now you have a couple who's probably has a higher average IQ, and their children are going to have a higher IQ of about 124, they say. So almost 10 points higher than the children in 1930. So only 22% of the children of the 1930 newlyweds could be expected to match or exceed the average of the children of the 1965 newlyweds. So already there's, massive, massive change. But what if it increases? What if it increases? And according to Robert Mayer, sociologist, it has increased. Assortative mating by educational level has increased over the period 1940 to 1987. And what he found is the odds of marrying somebody without a college degree dropped from 44% to 35%. And let me just double check. Did he mean? Yes. Okay. A college graduate marrying somebody without a college degree dropped from 44% to 35%. I wonder even what it is today. And what's kind of caused that to happen? Well, they talk about here the feminist revolution, which made it easier for the brightest women and brightest men to pair up, because it allowed for a lot more intermingling at these colleges, right? So before, men would meet women at like social circles, churches, organizations outside of school and work, but now there's more intermingling going on at the college level, at your work level. So you're more likely to meet somebody else of a higher IQ or of a IQ level that matches yours because you're in the same occupation, you go to the same college, and they pair up. Also, brains, the author state here, brains became sexy. All of a sudden, if there's a smart man, smart woman, or in this case, smart woman, that's more attractive now, maybe compared to other things, although other things, figure, hair color, whatnot, those maybe are still important, but now there's an emphasis on, hey, it's attractive to be smart for a woman. So that kind of helped out with it too. Finally, the limits of churning. NLSY data, 81% of the top 5% of IQ had obtained at least a bachelor's degree by 1990. At least a bachelor's degree. So how many of those now are going on to post-secondary education? That's even more elite of a club. So yeah, I feel like, compare this to now, 2021, I feel like this is still going on. The funneling system is functioning at a high level, already a very high level. The cognitive elite, they're being funneled into these high IQ positions. They're becoming increasingly segregated physically, both in the workplace and residential areas where you live. And the cognitive elite is also increasingly intermarrying in one another based on those other factors. They're just meeting up more in the workplace or at wherever they go to school. So the authors beg a question: how congruent are the interests of the cognitive elite with the rest of society? Right? You have this small group of people who are now going to arise to positions of power. Think about that company, manufacturing company. Most of the people in that company work at the manufacturing plant, right? But the smartest of the smart are in the company office building at the top floors. They're trying to navigate the company how they see it, what they think is best. Is it going to be the best for everybody in the company? I don't know. Maybe. Yeah, it could be. It could not be. It could be. I'm not sure. You'd hope it would be. But now think about this in outside of the workplace, just in society and politicians. Not much is said so far about politicians and IQ, etc. But you get people in these higher IQ positions now. What are they? How are they seeing the world compared to how everybody else sees the world? Are they congruent? Guys, that's going to wrap it up for chapter 4. Thank you so much if you listened to the end. I really appreciate it. If you like this content, please subscribe to this channel. If you have any questions about the book, sometimes I might have skipped over some things, or if you want more clarity, please comment, and I will do my best to answer it. We're going to do With Winning in Mind next week, and we'll go from there. But again, if you made it this far, thank you very much for listening. My name is Chris. This has been Chee-Tash. Take care.